Welcome to Drive the Daf, clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Taanis Daf we begin with the beginning of the third parak of the Masechta, which is the last few lines at the end of Daf Yud Ches. Again, we have all the Mishnayos of the parak all presented up front in the beginning of the parak, and the Mishnah, the lengthy Mishnah, which takes us through the first third of the Daf, discusses other situations in which we would decree fast days and days of prayer, tefillah, tzedakah, and possibly shofar blowing. We'll have other circumstances that are rain-related, other circumstances that are not rain-related, and we'll talk about where you have partial circumstances, where you have problems that are affecting one area, not another area. If some of these move from area to area, we may have fear in surrounding areas, which may cause Yom Tefillah and fasting. And the Gemara will go through a number of the cases of the Mishnah and explain what the issues are. Along the way, we'll have a couple of stories. The Mishnah has one, the Gemara has the famous one. We have Choni HaMa'agel, we have Nakdimin Ben Gurion. So let's begin. The Mishnah begins, and it says, all these fast days which we have said so far, which were all decreed for situations in which there was not enough rain, that is only referring to situations in which the rain was missing from the first general, usual rainfall. Now, usually the rain fell in two periods. It was Yoreh and Malkosh, the beginning of the season and the end of the season. The Yoreh rainfall at the beginning of the season was divided into three. The first, the second, and the third rainfall that was all included in Yoreh. So this Mishnah says this is only referring to where the first rainfall did not arrive. If, however, and the Mishnah does not discuss what happens if other rainfalls did not arrive, the Gemara will fill in for us that it's all three that's the problem. But if, however, the rain fell, but there were other problems, so we don't institute the three groupings of fast days. We've seen in the Masechta up till now that there were three groupings of fast days in increasing severity. First three, then another 7. And the last one was the most severe. Says the Mishnah, if you have a situation in which you have other problems, we jump straight to the most severe types of fast because these are serious problems right away. What are situations like that? So if the plants are warped, if they're changed somehow, they're not growing the way they should be. If the rain stopped between the scheduled rainfalls for 40 days, it means you had the first fall, then you didn't have the next one for 40 days. That's a bigger problem. The Gemara says that the Mishnah says that is a makas betzoros, that is a plague of a food shortage. Now, if the rain falls in some ways, if it falls for the vegetables but not for the trees, it falls for the trees and not for the vegetables, or it falls for both of them but not enough to fill the watering reservoirs, then that would also be a situation in which you would have to fast the full severity of the fast right away. Now, if you have some cities that received rainfall and other cities do not, so that is a fulfillment of the pasuk describing such things. The pasuk in Amos, it says, "V'imtarti al ir achas v'al ir achas lo amtir." I'll rain on one city and not on the other one. Chalka achas timater. One will receive rain and one will not. So this is a problematic situation. It's a desperate situation for the city that has not received rainfall. It's problems for the other city as well because they'll end up having to send food to the city which didn't receive any rainfall, and it cause problems for them as well. So therefore, everybody has to do something. The city that doesn't have any rainfall fasts and does the crying out procedure right away. The other cities, machlokes, Tanna Kama says they fast but they don't do the crying procedure, and Rabbi Kiva says they do the crying procedure but they do not fast. Now, similar tragedies that also apply to only one city and not others are, for example, if there's a plague in one city but not others, or if there's a collapse, there's a spate of structures that are collapsing, the wall or the buildings of the city are falling down. That's also a problem, and again you have the same thing. That city has to fast and do the crying out procedures, and Machlokas Rabbi Kiva and the Tanna Kama, which one the other cities do. Now, how do you define a plague? So the Mishnah says that's when you have a city that has 500 people in it, and there are 3 people that die from this disease within 3 days. That ratio of population to deaths in that amount of time, that is defined as a plague. If it's less death than that, that does not count as a plague right away. Now, the Mishnah continues listing other things. The following weather incidents that destroy crops would also cause us to do the most severe fast and crying out right away. So that would be blasting wind that destroys the crops. It would be dried out, what is called yerokon, where the crops turn yellow from dryness. A plague of locusts, a plague of chasil, which is another type of locusts. If wild animals are coming to the city to attack the people, that would be a problem. If there is a troop, a marauding troop, if there's an army that's attacking the city, that would be a problem. All these things we would do the fast-day procedure, the most strict one, right away. Now, all these also apply to other cities nearby because these are traveling problems. These, if they are here in the region, they'll affect other cities as well. They can move from one city to another very quickly. Mishnah brings an incident where the elders of Yerushalayim went down to their cities and they decreed a fast day because of the following thing. There was either a small amount of crops that was affected by shidafon, by blasting wind, and that was such a small amount that it's only enough to fill one oven full, and it was in Ashkelon, and they made fast days everywhere else. Another situation was where wolves appeared and they ate 2 children across the Jordan River. We still made fast everywhere. It basically says they didn't eat 2 children, all they did was they appeared. People saw them, and that was enough to cause fast to be decreed everywhere else. Now, the Mishnah now goes on to list things which we can call out even on Shabbos. Shabbos, usually we don't ask for our own needs, but if you have a serious, desperate situation, you do. An example of that would be if the city was surrounded by Nachrim that are attacking it, if there was a flooding river, or if there was a ship that was floundering in the sea and was getting ready to sink, then you would call out right away. Rabbi Yossi says that calling out is not talking about tefillah, that's talking about calling for help or blowing trumpets for help. Shimon HaTimani says plague, also you can cry out on Shabbos, but the Chachamim did not agree with that. Now, what about other types of tzaros that you call out for them? So, says the Mishnah, any other tzara that it shouldn't come, you should call out for them, except for too much rain. Too much rain you're not going to complain about. Says Rashi, that's referring to not where the rain is destructive and flooding, but where it's making things uncomfortable with too much mud, too much water in the streets. Now, the Mishnah brings the story of Choni HaMa'agel. Choni was a Talmid Chacham, and they came to him and they said there's not enough rain. He asked him to be mispalel, to daven for rain, so he said, okay, everybody go bring your Pesach ovens into your house. They're made out of earthenware, they're going to melt because of all the rain that's going to come. So they did so, and he went and he began to daven, and nothing happened. The rain did not fall. So he drew a circle on the ground and he stood in it, and he said, Master of the universe, your children place their face toward me because I'm like a child in your house, and I promised in your name, in your great name, and I promise now in your great name that I'm not going to move out of this circle until you have mercy on your children. And so it began to drizzle. He said, no, that's not what he asked for. I asked for enough rain to fill the wells and the reservoirs and the caves. So it started to pour, very furious, pounding rain. He said, no, that's not what I asked for either. I asked for rain which is a bracha, not rain which is too strong. So then it began to fall in the proper way, and it fell and fell and fell until Kaisel had to leave Yerushalayim because of all the flooding and go into Har HaBayis. So they came and they said to him, just like you daven that the rain should come, please daven now that it should stop. So he said, go see if the Even HaTayin, if the big stone which people used to use as a board to advertise objects that they lost or found, go see if that thing has melted. If it hasn't melted yet, it's not a problem yet. Now, Shimon ben Shetach was the leader at the time, sent to him, you spoke to Kadosh Baruch Hu with chutzpah. If not for the fact that you were Choni, I would decree excommunication upon you. But what should I do? You're the type of person who can sin to Kadosh Baruch Hu, and he'll have mercy on you and do what you asked for anyway, just like a child who sins to his father and he does what he wants anyway, in a fulfillment of the pasuk Yismach Avicha v'Imecha v'Tagel Yoldo Secha. Says the Mishnah further, what happens if you have a situation where they decreed a fast day and the rain came in the fast day itself? Do you keep fasting, finish off the fast, or do you stop because you already were answered? So it's a machlokas at what point in the day we would stop. According to the Tanna Kama, it's only if the rain came before sunrise. If that's what happened, then you don't have to fast. According to Rebbe Lazar, it's even if the rain didn't come until before Chatzos. If it came before Chatzos, you wouldn't finish the fast. However, if it fell after Chatzos, then you would finish the fast. Says the Mishnah was a situation that happened in Lud, and rain came before Chatzos, and Rabbi Tarfon said, go home, eat, drink, make a yantif. They went home, they ate and drank, and they made a yantif, and they came back to Shul in the afternoon, and they said Halal Hagadol, the chapter of Tehillah, in which every pasuk ends with Kila Oam Chazdo. Okay, now the Gemara begins. So first, the Gemara has a kasha on the Mishnah from Abraisa. The Mishnah had said that all these fast days that we do, the set of 3, 3, and 7, it's only if there was a problem in the first rainfall, the first of the 3 rainfalls that make up the period of rain called Yoreh. Says the Gemara, there's a Abraisa that says that until all 3 rainfalls are missed, you don't do any fast days. The first and the second, you just do a Yom Tefillah, you don't do a fast day. So why are we saying here that you do a fast day right when the first one is missed? So the Gemara answers, what we mean to say is that if all the rains didn't arrive, including the first rain, then you do the series of increasing fast days. If, however, the first rain came and then you have problems, that's a much more severe problem, and then you do the strict fast days right away. Says the Gemara further, Rav Nachman says that this, which we said in the Mishnah, that if there's a problem, if the crops are twisted, if they're malformed, you do the strict fast days right away. That's only if they're malformed. However, if they're dried up, you wouldn't. Rashi explains, too, Pshatim will go with the Pshat that they are dried, there's nothing you can do about it anymore, and therefore it's a tefillas shav, they will never recover. Says the Gemara, yeah, this is obvious, of course. They're dried, they're not going to recover. The Mishnah didn't say if they're dried, the Mishnah said only if they're malformed. So the Gemara says, no, we're talking about a situation where they did grow a little bit after they dried. They dried and then they grew a little bit, and therefore you may think that there's hope, and Rav Nachman means to tell you, no, there's no hope. Just because they grew a little bit is not going to help. Okay, back to the Mishnah. We had seen that if the rain stops between the first rainfall and the next rainfall for 40 days, that counts as a makas b'tzores, a affliction of a food shortage. So the Gemara now defines the terms. The Gemara says makas b'tzores. Rav Yehuda says that is a plague which is going to bring to a food shortage. Now we have to define the terms b'tzores and rav. B'tzores means a shortage of types. Rav is a famine. So b'tzores is not as strong and not as dangerous, not as powerful as a rav. So the Gemara has a couple ways of defining the different levels of each. First of all, Rav Nachman says that it depends on the rivers. If it's river to river, that's a shortage. If it's country to country, that's a famine. What does it mean? The Rashi has 2 pshatim again. Simple pshat is that if there is only a lack of food in one area, but you could bring other foods by boat down the river from close by areas, that's not considered to be a famine. If, however, the entire region, the entire country has a food shortage, or you can't bring by river, you got to import it over land by animal, that is a much more serious problem. The Gemara now brings another way of defining it, and this is Rav Chanina, and he says that if the issue is in the price, so that's called a b'tzoros, that's called a shortage. If the issue is in the supply, that's called a famine. So as follows, if the price is spiked, but there is enough supply, even if the price is 4 times what it usually is, such as if it's a sa per sela, or a sela per sa, that counts as a b'tzoros. If, however, the price is normal, but there's a shortage, that would be a famine, that would be considered to be a hunger, a rav. Says Rav Yochanan, that only is in a situation where there is enough money for people to be able to buy. If, however, there's a shortage of money, people can't afford it, then it doesn't matter how much supply you have. If there isn't enough funds to go around to purchase the food, that would count as a rav right away. It says Rav Yochanan, remember a situation where the price was normal. It was 4 sa for a sela, but there was not enough food, and therefore was considered to be a famine. In Tveria, this happened. Okay, says the Gemara further, back in the Mishnah, we had seen that it's possible to have a situation in which it rains for the vegetables, or the trees, or the wells, but not for the other ones. So the Gemara says, you understand most of these. Gentle rain is good for the vegetables, and therefore if it rained only gently, it was good for the vegetables, but not for the trees. Strong rain is good for trees, but not for the vegetables, and therefore if it only had strong rain, that was good for the trees and not for the vegetables. Both of these, if it rained both gently and strong, but not enough to fill the wells, that would be considered to be good for the vegetables and the trees, but not for the wells. Problem is, we have a brisa that says that there's a situation where it's enough to fill the wells, but not enough for the vegetables and the trees. It's not good for the vegetables and the trees. The Gemara says, how is that possible? So my answer is, that's because that would be if it came down in a flooding downpour all at once. That's way too strong, even for the trees, and that would be considered no good, even though it fills the wells, but it wouldn't be considered a positive situation because it does not take care of the trees and the vegetables. Okay, now when do you cry out for each of these things? So the Gemara brings another bryce on the subject. The Gemara says, for trees, you can start to be mispalel in the Pesach time. That is when it's very important to have rain for the trees. The fruit crop will be ruined. That's when it's beginning to come out. If you don't have rain, then it'll be a problem. However, for wells, reservoirs, and storage trenches of water, you start to be mispalel right away when there's no rain, even Sukkot time, because everybody needs water to drink at all times. Anytime that there's no water to drink, the Gemara says you are supposed to be mispalel and do the procedure right away. Now, what do we mean when we say you make fast days right away? The Gemara says Monday, Thursday, Monday. You don't make fast days in a row. You don't start fast days on a different day. Now, all these you only need to do the tefillas only in the place that is struck by this. Other areas don't have to be concerned with it, according to this brisa. Now, there's a disease called askara. It's a very terrible disease. So, if it's around, sometimes it is fatal and sometimes it's not fatal. If it's the non-fatal version, you don't have to do the ta'aka, the teruah procedure. If, however, it is a fatal version, then you do have to do the procedure. Now, what about locusts? There's a type called goivai. If you see one of those, it's a big problem because they will come in swarms, and therefore you have to do the tefillah right away. Shimon ben Elazar says even if you just see chagav, whenever you see a few chagavim, there's a whole swarm right behind it, and you better do that tefillah procedure right away. It's going to destroy all the food in the fields. Now, which years do we need to do this? So they have another brisa here. Brisa says that tefillah for trees is only during the 6 years of the Shemitah cycle, but not on Shemitah itself, because nobody's going to, there isn't anybody who could sell that Shemitah fruit, and therefore it's not a problem. But if it's not filling the wells and the reservoirs, and even on Shemitah you need water to drink, you got to take care of that right away. Now, Shimon ben Gamliel disagrees, and he says even for trees during Shemitah feed the poor, and therefore it's very important that we do tefillah for them as well. Now we have another brisa similar that says the same thing, except that it adds that even for vegetation, for wild vegetables, what we call sfichen, Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says you should do tefillah for that as well. Even if you just don't have rain for the vegetables, you got to do tefillah for that as well. Okay, now the Gemara discusses some Magadata about rainfall. Gemara brings a brisa of Rav Elazar ben Parta. He says from the day that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, rain has become withered, became dried, became withheld from the world, and it's much more restricted. There are some years when it rains a lot, some years where it rains very little. There are some years where it rains on time, and some years where it rains late. Now, what's it like? So the Gemara says, if it rains on time, it's compared to a servant that his master gave him his pay in the beginning of the week. Therefore, he could use it to buy flour, and he could use it to bake bread, and the bread will be fully baked and ready, and he could eat normally the entire week. However, during a time when the rain does not come in its proper time, that means it comes late in the season, and the crops don't have a chance to ripen properly. That's like a master who paid his servant at the end of the week on Friday, and he doesn't have time to buy flour, make the dough, and to bake the bread in the proper way, and it ends up being eaten in an improper, not properly baked way. Now, another thing similar, the Gemara says in a year where there is enough rain, there's a lot of rain, that's like a situation where a master paid his worker all at once. He gave him a large amount of flour, let's say a core. So in a situation like that, he can grind all his flour at once. Now that's good, because every time you grind, you lose a certain amount to the mill. Flour gets lost in the cracks and gets stuck to the parts, therefore you lose. However, you only lose the same amount no matter how much flour you grind, a core or a kav. A core is many times larger than a kav. So if you have to grind a kav each time, you're going to lose the same amount for each time. You end up losing much more. If, however, you can grind the core all at once, so then you lose only that same amount for an entire core that's ground. The rest of the core is ground without any loss. That's similar to the rain. A certain amount of rain gets absorbed into the ground and soaked up and goes to waste. That amount is the same no matter how much rain falls. So we prefer that the rain fall all at once so that we don't lose that amount of rain every time. And therefore we want the rain to fall a lot. If, however, it falls bit by bit, so then we're losing the rain each time it falls. A significant amount of it is lost. The Gemara gives another parable. The Gemara says when it rains a lot, that's like somebody who is making clay. He's mixing water with his earth, with his clay powder, with the mud, and if he has enough water, then it becomes properly made and it works. If, however, he doesn't have enough water, he runs out of water, then it'll never be properly formed. Now the Gemara quotes the story of Nakdim ben Gurion. It's a brisa. The brisa says there was one time where Klal Yisrael were being Ola Regel, they were traveling to Yerushalayim, and did not have enough water to drink along the way. So there was a problem. Nakdim ben Gurion went to a Gentile, probably a Roman lord there at the time, who owned a lot of wells along the way, and he said, let me borrow from you 12 wells. I'll take them from you, and I will make them available for the people who are being Ola Regel to drink from, and I will pay you back. How am I going to pay you back? I promise you rain will come and fill up your wells to a great amount, and then it'll be worth it for you. And if I don't pay you back, if the rain doesn't fall, I will pay you in silver. I will give you 12 talents of silver, which is a vast amount of money. Okay, they set a date by which he had to have the rain either fall or pay the silver, and the time came, and it was the day that he owed it dawned, and the rain still had not come. So the master, the Adon, the Gemara calls him, sent a message to Nakdim, and he said, either give me my rain or pay me my money. So he said, I still have a whole day. Only afternoon, at noon, he said, well, it's already noontime, either give me the rain or pay me my money. He said, I still have the rest of the day. Mincha time, mid-afternoon came, and he said, where's either water or the money? Where is it? So he said, I still have time. So the guy laughed. He said, it hasn't rained all year, and this guy thinks he's going to laugh now in the last few hours before he owes it. Convinced that he had earned himself a good amount of silver, he went to the bathhouse. In the meantime, Nakdim ben Gurion went into the Beis HaMikdash. He wrapped himself in his talis, and he said, Rabbeinu Shalom, Master of the universe, it is clear before you that I did not do this for my honor or for the honor of my family. I did it for your honor, in order that people that are being Ola Regel should be able to have water to drink. And immediately clouds formed, and it began to rain, and it rained and rained until it filled all those reservoirs, all those springs, all the way to the top, and more than that. So the guy came out of the bathhouse, and he saw what had happened, and he met Nakdim ben Gurion coming out of the Beis HaMikdash, and he said to him, look, I know that you have, Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, has turned the world upside down in your honor, in your sake. However, I am not out of options yet, because as you see, it's dark, and therefore night has fallen already, and it was too late. You already owe me the money, and this water that rained here is mine. Even though I know that he did it for you, but it's still claiming that it's mine. So Nakdim ben Gurion went back into the Beis HaMikdash. He was mispal. He said, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, show that you have friends in this world, and the clouds broke, and the sun was visible again. It was clear that the sun had not set yet, and the guy said the same thing. He said, had the clouds not broken, split, I would have had a tain on you, but now I do not, and therefore...
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.